20 million. That's the number, the staggering, almost unimaginable number of people that one man is believed to be responsible for killing. Today, we're telling the story of his final, chaotic days.
All right, let's get into it. This is our explainer on the death of Joseph Stalin, a moment that didn't just end a life, it completely reshaped the 20th century.
But to really understand the end of his story, we have to start with the terror that defined his entire rule.
The system he created, what we call Stalinism, well, it really boiled down to one thing, an incredibly oppressive style of government. This wasn't just about policies. It was about creating an atmosphere of pure fear that seeped into every part of the Soviet Union.
And here's something that's really interesting. His physical health seemed to be failing right alongside his mental state. In his last years, he had arteriosclerosis, which is a hardening of the arteries. A lot of historians think this just poured gasoline on his infamous paranoia, making his temper more vicious and totally unpredictable.
And that paranoia? It hit an absolute terrifying peak in the final months of his life, with a bizarre conspiracy theory that became known as the Doctor's Plot. The accusations were just wild. I mean, something straight out of a horror movie. The state-run newspapers were calling them murderers in white gowns. These highly respected doctors were accused of killing babies, of poisoning their patients, and even of assassinating top Soviet leaders. It was basically a state-sponsored witch hunt.
Now, make no mistake, this was not random. In January of 1953, 9 doctors were arrested. 6 of them were Jewish, and that was absolutely intentional. This whole thing kicked off a nasty, state-fueled wave of anti-Semitism. It's believed Stalin was even planning to deport all Soviet Jews to Siberia. The only thing that stopped it was what happened next.
And that brings us to the final act, the collapse.
Okay, so here's how it all went down. March 1st, after a late night of drinking at his country house, Stalin is found on the floor. He's paralyzed and can't speak. But get this, it takes him until the next day to even call for doctors. And when the doctors finally show up, they're supposedly so terrified of him they're afraid to even touch him. They eventually diagnose a huge stroke, and he just lingers. Until finally, on March 5th, he dies.
And this next part just perfectly captures the insane level of fear that surrounded him. When his inner circle, guys like Khrushchev and Beria, first get called to the house, the guards tell them he's just asleep. So they see him lying there, motionless, but they're too scared to disturb him. So they just leave, with no idea that their leader is actually dying on the floor.
We actually have an eyewitness account of his final moments from his own daughter, Svetlana. She was there, and she described it with this absolutely chilling quote. She said his eyes opened with a terrible look, either mad or angry and full of the fear of death. Then he raised his left hand, like he was pointing or cursing, and then it was over.
So he's dead, but his death wasn't just the end of a life. It was a massive turning point, the end of an entire era, and the fallout was immediate.
What happened right after was so strange. You had these two totally opposite reactions happening at once. On one hand, you have this huge public display of grief. Massive crowds swarmed Red Square for his funeral. So many people that some were actually crushed to death in the chaos. But behind closed doors, total relief. Lavrenti Beria, the terrifying head of security, apparently didn't even try to hide how happy he was that the tyrant was finally gone.
And that power vacuum, it didn't last long at all. The very next day, his lieutenants are already carving up the empire. Malenkov gets the top job as premier. Molotov takes over foreign affairs. And, maybe most importantly, Beria grabs control of the Ministry of Internal Affairs, which put him in charge of the entire state security machine.
And here is the truly ironic twist. It's Beria, one of the cruelest men in the whole regime, who kicks off the process of de-Stalinization. He started setting up these private viewings for party officials, where he would play secret recordings of Stalin's paranoid rants, basically to prove he was guilty of ordering the arrests of innocent people. The demolition of the myth had begun.
When you zoom out, you see that Stalin's death in 1953 wasn't just a big deal for the Soviet Union. It was a monumental turning point in the Cold War. It changed the entire dynamic of global politics and kicked off a brand new, very uncertain chapter for the entire world.
So, the tyrant was gone. The man responsible for millions of deaths was dead, but his death left behind this massive haunting question, one that Russia and the world are still wrestling with today. How does a nation ever truly undo the kind of terror that he created?